Okay. All right. Well, welcome to Faith and Calm. Now we are at class number 87. So uh, I titled this, a blessing on your head, Mazel Tov, Mazel Tov. You recognize the reference. For all, Shlomo should have said everybody knows the scene Fiddler on the Roof, so we all know that one. And that's a little bit of what we're going to talk about today. Is about giving blessings, which good thing. Should all be blessed. We should all really feel blessed. And what does it really mean to give a blessing? Because that is what happened in the Parsha of the last week. Yaakov Avinu, he was giving blessings to all his sons. And I never really understood. It's a lot of text. It's a lot of stuff about, about these blessings to each of the tribes. And it never really never hit me as deeply or meaningfully. It was okay, but didn't really excite me. So I saw something about it, and I thought I would share it with you and see how it resonates. See how it goes. So two sets of two little stories here. So the Jews are all going down to Egypt, and Yaakov knows that's the story. He knows that the exile is beginning, and they're going to be there for 400 years. I thought it was 210. They got off easy. 210 years of slavery. They got off easy because it was so terrible that God said, I'm not letting go for the full 400. That's what happened. So that was why they got off easy and they go for the full 400. So Yaakov, what?
No, the cursor was on your face. I just want to move.
Okay. So Yaakov, at the beginning of the parsha, Yaakov calls two of his grandchildren. And he says something very strange. He says, he tells Yosef, he says, I want to bless your two sons because I consider them like my sons. So I want these grandsons to be like my children. Anyone born after this, though, it's your business. I ain't handling the tuition and I ain't buying the house. So Yaakov says, okay, these two, I want to bless them. So Yosef brings those two of them together. Menashe and Ephraim are their names. And he puts Menashe on the right-hand side, and he puts Ephraim on the left-hand side. And he says, go ahead, bless them. And Yaakov takes his hands and he swaps them. He swaps them one left for the right and right for the left. Okay, yeah, show it. Like it's cool. And he blesses them. And Yosef gets upset and he says, no, Father, that's not the way you do it. Menashe is the older one. You should bless him like with the right hand. And Ephraim is the younger one. You should bless him with the left hand. And Yaakov says, no, I know what I'm doing here. And Menashe will be good, but Ephraim will be bigger, better, more than him. So you have to understand a couple things. And it's all going to, because of these things, we'll get some very interesting understanding of a little bit about how gets us through difficult days and how we get through, how we're going to get through this gullus. So the first question is, I don't know if you know this is the custom, but the custom is that in many Jewish households, Friday night, the father blesses the children. Each one comes over, he puts his hands on their heads, and he blesses them. It says he should make you like Ephraim Menashe. It's a very sweet couple. My wife can do it too. Yeah, I was asking my wife, did you ever see that and so forth. Chabad custom is to do it before Yom Kippur, but also we say the same thing every Havdalah. We use these as the prototypes for how to bless Jewish kids, Menashe and Ephraim. Why are these more than the other 12 other sons? Why these particular ones? And then, of course, is they even got the portion of Yosef. They were considered to be like the sons of Yaakov. So it doesn't work out well. You got 14 now. So yeah, whenever you count Menashe and Ephraim, you don't count Levy. Whenever you count Levy, you don't call Ephraim Menashe. So it balances out. There is still 12, but it makes things very complicated. Obviously, when his kids are not counted, Yosef is not counted.
When his kids are counted, he's not counted.
So. And then what's the argument? I do understand Yosef's point. Yosef says, listen, we don't call us in trouble again. We had the same problem before with Abraham and with Ishmael. You blessed, the younger one. And then with with Yaakov and Asaph, and even with me, I was the younger son. So let's not keep doing the same problem again. Older one gets the older one's blessing. So I understand Yosef's argument. What's Yaakov's thing? The answer to this simply is Yosef is a very interesting character. Yosef, of all the brothers, really had a very tough life. His brothers didn't like him when he was little. When he was 17 years old, they sold him to Egypt. That's really not liking your brother. They said goodbye. We're not seeing you again. And even when he came down to Egypt, it was a very tough life. It was a very hard life. He was a slave, and he seemed to be doing well. But then this lady started chasing after him, and he ended up in a dungeon, a pit, not a prison, a pit. It was a very difficult life. On the other hand, Yosef seems to be the one who always floats up and rises above everything else. He's always the kind of person that you'd like to be around. He's confident, he's strong, he never feels any anger, even to the Egyptian butler and baker who were thrown in the prison. He never, he says, why are you sad? And the answer is, of course, why aren't you sad, Yosef? You got no hope for you, no life, no marriage, no family, you're stuck in a pit. He feels, it's perfectly fine. So, Yosef is a very interesting character. He has the ability to always float above the situations and the troubles of life. We have to learn from Yosef. We have to learn something from Yosef. He had a very, and by the way, in the one hand, he's a very softy. You like him, he's crying all the time. He's crying when he sees his brothers. He's crying when he sees Binyamin. He cries when he sees his father. Nobody cries in Tanakh as much as Yosef. 9 times he cries. So he's a very soft character, but then again, he's also the viceroy. He's the power of the house. So it's an interesting combination, He's not a pushover. He's not broken. But he doesn't get hard. Life hits him a lot, but he doesn't get hard. So what is the secret? So the answer is these 2 sons. Yaakov says that you had these 2 kids before I came down to Egypt, and that's the key. These 2 kids are the kind of kids that can survive the Egyptian exile. They can survive our exile, and that is what we're trying to instill in us. We're trying to bless our children and bless ourselves, but we should have these true traits. And these 2 traits are ability to be able to survive and deal with all the difficulties of the world. So what are the 2 traits that we're talking about? The first one is Menashe. The second one is Ephraim. The Rebbe explains, and he says, Menashe is often translated as forgetfulness. Yosef named Menashe. It even says in the Chumash, he says he named him Menashe because he made me forget all the troubles of my exile here in Egypt. The Rebbe points out that Menashe actually, in Ephraim, means fruitful. The God made me fruitful here in the land of Egypt. So Menashe was the firstborn. Menashe actually, it's not perfectly good translation to call it forgetful. Really, the source of the word is from the Gid Hanasha, the sciatic nerve. When Yaakov was wrestling with the angel, he dislocated his sciatic nerve. It really means dislocated. That's what it means. In other words, what God did is he removed him, he disconnected him from the pain and the suffering of Egypt. He was able to disconnect and not to feel it personally. He didn't take it in that way. He was able to detach himself from some of the suffering. What does this mean? It means that Yosef is Menashe symbolizes the ability not to let everything become to affect you in a permanent way. When kids play, I'll give you an example. When kids play outside, little kids, they run, they jump, they fall down, they get hurt, they get bruised. They get bruised a lot. Is that fun? Yeah, usually they had a lot of fun. The more bruised they come back, the more fun they had. That's a bruise. Life bruises people. There's a lot of hard things in life. Yosef went through them. He knew exactly what bruises is, but he never let them become tattoos. There's a difference between a bruise and a tattoo. A tattoo means it's really stuck on you permanently, and that's how we have to somehow relate to some of the problems that we have in this world. Nobody gets through this life easy. It comes with a lot of bruises, and nobody knew that more than Yosef. He went through a lot of bruising in life, but he didn't let it define him. He didn't let his pain and his suffering define who he is. He didn't let it become his tattoo. He didn't let the people who insult him live in his brain 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, rent free. Sometimes when you have troubles, you just keep thrashing on them and thinking over them over and over again. How do I get out of this? How are we going to go over? How are we going to get back to the normal? That's letting it tattoo you. That's letting it become and define who you are. The first stage in being able to deal with the tears of Gullus is to be able to to detach from it. That's the first stage. And then you can have the second stage, which is you'll see fruit from it. In other words, like we said last week, Yosef says, I am Yosef, Asher macharti b'Mitzrayim. Because, Asher means because you sold me to Egypt, I became who I am. That's a higher level, and that's what Yaakov was saying. That's the higher level. That's why I gave him the blessing of the firstborn, is because to actually be able to transform the difficulties and to see how the difficulties are actually making you into something more powerful. But that always comes second. That always comes second. First, you have the firstborn, Menashe. You can't go first in saying, I really like this. It was just wonderful. And I really see how this is all great. I mean, it's as stupid as when sometimes people go to a Shiva house and they say, that person, they say some very stupid things. They say, that person, they're in a better world. Or boy, you're going to grow so much from this and so forth. And you're trying to explain and be God's lawyer and explain to him how this is all going to turn out for the good for you. That's not it's not your job. When a person is suffering, you have to empathize with them and feel with them and realize that, life has a lot of pain with it. And then maybe in the future, you'll be able to see how things will be fruitful from it, but you don't try and push that. You have to first go through the first stage. Well, that's Menashe and Ephraim. That's the two stages. This first stage is you have to somehow learn how to detach, then you have to later. Actually, an interesting story that I heard connected with this is there was a gentleman named the Brisker Rebbe. He survived the Holocaust, lost all his wife, his children, and so forth. His name was Velvo Brisk. He moved to Israel, and he explained an interesting thing in the Birchas Hamazon. When we start, we say Shir Hamalos B'Shuv Adonai Shivat Zion Hayinu Kalamim. When Mashiach comes, we will be considered like and the Jews return to Israel. We be like dreamers. And he explains an interesting. What are you saying, like dreamers? He says, this is only a Holocaust survivor really has the right to say this. He says, sometimes people have dreams that they were in the Holocaust. I never have those, but some people do. They have those dreams. They were in Auschwitz or whatever, things of that sort. Maybe they were reading too much of that stuff, the books there. Anyway, they have that. When they wake up in the morning, they're in panic. What did I just go through? But after a few minutes, they're very thankful because they realize it was just a dream. It wasn't reality. If it was reality, we'd be having nightmares week after week after week, year after year after year after year. I'm glad it was only a dream. It really wasn't true. He says, come Mashiach. When Mashiach comes, we'll be able to dislocate. We'll be able to detach from the troubles that we've suffered in all these thousands of years. And nobody suffered like the Jews. And we will be able to look at these kind of things, which we consider as real, and yet we will see it in the context, in the picture, and we'll be able to look at it as a dream. This is the challenge. The challenge is to be able to get to that state right away. Not so easy. While I was saying this, I remember the famous story. I don't think I've ever said it before. So the Rebbe Rashab had a brother. This was the fifth Lubavitcher Rebbe, and he was a businessman, and he owned, it was somebody else, but it was in the time of that. Anyway, he was a chassid of the Rebbe Rashab, this guy, and he had many boats and a lot of business and timber business and stuff like that. One day, he was also, because he was so rich, he had a yeshiva. And he had many bachrim, and they liked him very much. And he spent his whole day just learning, and so forth. And his business went fine. One day, a message telegram came, and one of the bachrim picked it up and looked at it, and it said that his boats that he had with all the timber had been sunk at sea. And he was very scared. How is he going to bring this message to his beloved Rosh Yeshiva? So he thought of a scheme. He was a clever guy. He says, Rabbi, I have a question for you. He says, oh, sure, ask the question. He says, it says in Judaism that you're supposed to make a blessing whenever something good happens to you. And then you're also supposed to give a blessing if there's a bracha to say when bad things happen to you. You say, Hatova meiti, Hatova meiti.
No.
What?
Did.
Then? What is it? Hatova meiti is for good, or what? Baruch dynamic? No.
It's not.
I think it's Hatova meiti.
Okay.
I think it is. I think that's what it is. I've done it for a long time.
Okay.
Anyway, he said it to him. And he says, I don't understand. How can you thank God for terrible things that happen to you? So he starts to explain, and he says, when you believe that God is the creator of all the universe, and everything is for the good, and ultimately God only wants good. He didn't create the world to be destroyed or hurt or punishments or something like that. He wants to see his project succeed. And he tries to explain it, and the Rav Hakim says, I don't understand. He says, listen, let me ask you a question. He says, you say that you're supposed to give a blessing for everything that happens to you. What would be if for just a theoretical case, what if you heard that all of the ships that you had sent on that Virgin sunk? Would you actually get up and say and be happy and dance and sing? And the rabbi says, yes, absolutely. You would have to sing and dance and rejoice and thank Hashem for what he does for you. So the bacher says, Rabbi, start dancing. And he faints. And afterwards they asked him, he says, wait a second, you gave these wonderful speeches about how you're supposed to be thankful for all the terrible things that you happen. He says, now I don't understand that Gemara either. I don't know how to explain it. So, there's a difference between the intellectual understanding and the emotional explanation. Suffering, pain, and difficulties is not something that you explain and you give a class on and you show what it is. It's a process. It's a lot of work that has to be done. But what Menashe is basically teaching us is you have to be able to feed forward and get to the future, get beyond this, because eventually you will. Eventually you will. I think there was a similar story just like that, who says, oh no, I won't go into that story. Anyway, I'll save it for another time. The other story that I wanted to tell you was, and I thought this was very interesting, was there one of the blessings that Yaakov gives is to two of his sons, Shemitan and Levy. This is number 2 son and number 3 son, right? There was Euphraim, there was Shimon and Levy. Now, if you read it last week in the Chumash, you will notice something very different. It's a very strange blessing. He says, he talks about Shimon and Levy, and he refers to the fact that they were the ones who destroyed the whole town of Shechem because of the rape of Dinah. And he says, cursed be their anger. It was wrathful, and I don't want to be in your counsel at all. And I will scatter you among the people of Yehuda and the Am Yisrael. And I will divide you among Yehuda and scatter you among the Am Yisrael. Doesn't sound like a blessing at all. In fact, Yehuda, who was next in line, was like running away at this point. He just says, I don't want a blessing. Reuven got a sort of a slap on the wrist. These two guys really got crushed. And he says, I don't want to be around at all. And then God gives Yehuda a very nice blessing. I mean, not Yaakov. So there was a commentator. His name was Kalman Ephraim. And he was born in 1758 and died in the 1820s. And he wrote one of the early Hasidic books called Mor V'Shemesh. And in his commentary, he explains how this is actually a very insightful way of blessing somebody. So what does he say, basically? He says, simply, he says, there are some people who by nature are very self-critical. They see little things wrong with themselves, and they really, 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 because out of their seriousness and out of their sincerity, they feel I have to work on it, and they're very scrutinizing themselves, and they're very, very difficult on themselves. He says, and all Jews are actually, in one way or another, they come from one of the 12 tribes. These traits that you see in the 12 tribes, they exist today in different types of people. So there are some Jews, you may know them, I know them, maybe you're one of them and so forth, but they're very, very serious, and they are very hard to approach, because when the person is very, very critical of themselves, they can appear to be very, very critical on other people too. And it just comes with the territory that when you take everything so religiously. He uses the word Frum, and so forth. You can't be around people who are lightheaded and gagging and stuff like that, because you're extremely, extremely sensitive about yourself. So you don't want to, you just say, how can I hang around and waste my time like other people? So this can be a very difficult kind of personality to deal with. He says that was the problem with Shimon and Levy. From a positive viewpoint, the father was basically telling them, look, you're doing this for good. You think you're making yourself very, you're doing it to be more religious, more connected with God, and you're honest. I understand. I'm not criticizing you. I'm telling you who you are. If he just said lovey-dovey things to them, they wouldn't have understood, because they're very critical, self-critical. So he says it in a way very psychologically smart. He says, I noticed about you, and I know you're coming from a good place, but this is not what I want for Judaism. I can't be united with you. I won't be in your councils, because this kind of approach is going to really off-put everybody. You can't, and that's what they did. They couldn't abide. They were the two who actually, out of the 10 other tribes, they went and they killed all the people in Shechem. Why? Because they couldn't deal with this kind of that kind of behavior. And the same thing with when Yosef came. They were the ones that actually, through Yosef, first said, the dreamer is coming, we have to get rid of this guy. So they were very, that was their nature. They were just very, very, so he says a very beautiful and very interesting thing. He says that I will divide you among Yehuda, and I will spread you out among Yisrael. What is he saying there? He's saying, you know what you guys got to do? You're fine. You know what you'd have to do? You have to stop just hanging out with your own kind, and you have to go out and hang out with average, everyday Joes. Not just the Yisraels, but also the Yehudas. You have to find what people are like. You have to hang out with them. You have to socialize with them. You have to spread yourself out and see that, what, don't hang out with only your own religious groups and so forth like that. Hang out, because there's a lot of wisdom in people. People live through life and they have a lot of wisdom. And when you hang out with them, and so forth, you'll see what people are like, and you'll open up yourself too. And this is a very wise kind of thing. Rabbi why compared it to, there's a new kind of psychological therapy called IFS. Have you ever heard of this? Internal family systems.
Family systems.
Yeah. And he says it's sort of reminiscent of that, because if you criticize their criticism, you're not going to get anywhere. What you have to do is find out what they're protecting inside themselves. The reason why they're so critical is they're afraid somebody else is going to criticize them. So they feel, if I'm more critical of myself, and then therefore nobody will get to me first, because I will be Mr. Perfect, and nobody will be able to criticize me. There's something going on there where there's something vulnerable inside of themselves. And this ultra, perfectionism is actually trying to protect something and so forth. So the Yaakov is really being very perceptive of them. First he says, I'm not coming to criticize your criticism, because I know what you're going to do with it. You're just going to be more critical. If you criticize me, criticize that, it's not going to get anywhere. I'm going to compliment you. I'm going to say, I noticed you really are very fine people, and you're trying to be very fine. The problem is the way you're doing it is going to get you into a lot of trouble. Let me give you some advice. Hang out with the average Joes. You'll see, you'll see. Don't just hang out with, with people trying to be, Mr. Perfect among yourselves. Hang out with average people and you'll see, So Rabbi I finished it with an interesting story. He said that, and I'll finish it there too. He said that there was a shaliach, a Chabad shaliach from Yale University who traveled to Israel, and he went to Rabbi Yadin Steinsaltz. And when he was there, he said, I want to meet the most holy people, the most inspiring people in Jerusalem. Who do I start with? And he was figuring that he would be sent to the biggest rabbis and other people. And Adin Steinsaltz told him, he said, where you'll find the most impressive, most inspiring people in Jerusalem? You'll find them in the barber shops. You'll find them in the kiosks. You'll find them at the taxi stands. Just hang out. Some of these older people with walking around with canes and they just, go into the store for 50 years, the same store. They're very interesting people, especially in Jerusalem. They have a lot of world knowledge, a very simple life knowledge. They may not look religious, they may not be anything, but there's a lot of wisdom. And so when I was hearing this on the tape, I was thinking, I've been saying Kaddish for Shlomo Judas's uncle. His name was Rabbi Dr. Yisrael Makdei. He was a Holocaust survivor. He just passed away last month at the age of 100. And we visited him every time we went to Israel, and he was just he was a pleasure to be around. He had a certain joie de vivre. Just everybody liked to be around him. He was happy and cheery, and he didn't have a easy life. He lost his wife at an early age. He was a Holocaust survivor. He lost his son. Towards the end of his life, he was half blind. One eyeball was taken out and so forth. He couldn't hear. But this guy liked to sing. He was happy, and he wasn't just a physical doctor. He was a spiritual doctor. You hang around him, and you just felt good. You felt good because and everybody loved him. He was just a loving person. So my wife, one time said, "Uncle, tell me your secret of life." Yes. Did you ever tell this one? You've told this one? Yes. So I said two things. He said, once, he's never harsh on himself. He always takes care of himself. He says, the doctors say you don't eat too much butter and too much of the meat or something. I always make myself an egg and some butter and a bread. And, I'm nice to myself. I'm not ultra stringent with myself. The second part was even better, is he says, when things don't go my way, I always say to myself, am I so important and so special that everything should always go my way? So, you listen to the older people and they say some very smart things in life, and you never know who's going to say it. So that's what Yaakov was saying. Hang out with the Yehudas, hang out with the average Jew. There's a lot of wisdom there. There's a lot of life knowledge and so forth. And yeah, don't be so ultra critical of yourself. You'll just everybody else. So with that, I'll hand the baton off to my wife, and maybe she'll continue with it.
That was lovely, Yaskol Shimon.
Yeah, that was a very special teaching. Thank you. I really appreciated it.
Thank you, Yehuda Shimon.
Okay. Hi, everybody.
Sure,
Molly, you got a
Cohen.
haircut?
Yes, she did.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
Yeah, I
It looks
did.
like everybody got a haircut. Okay, good. Oh, Amy, did you get a haircut too? Look,
Ah,
something about this week, I guess. Okay. So let's put this over here. Let's put how's that gonna work? Oh, it's better. Okay, good.
Could I ask one question?
Please.
How did Yaakov feel about what Shimon and Levy did in
Well-
Shechem? I mean, what did he think should have happened?
I don't know what he thought should have happened. I'll have to tell you that halachically, what Shimon and Levy did wasn't okay. The entire town knew that that Shechem kidnapped Dinah, and not only did he rape her, he abused her, and kept her captive. He not only raped her in the normal way, he did other things. And she was a girl. She was not a big woman. And the entire town, he was the favorite of the town. He was like the mayor's son, next to be in control of the town. And the entire town protected him and agreed to what, like they were accomplices. They were not accomplices. They whatever,
Enablers.
Uh,
Enablers.
exactly. And so according to Torah law, they also, this is a capital crime. And it was a heinous thing. You know, she was 10 years old. It was a heinous crime.
Oh my
And,
God.
yeah, heinous crime. So so anyway, you know, so whatever they got, they deserved. and all the men of that town. And what else was there? You know, sometime I can tell, it's a fascinating thing, the whole story about Dina, what happened to her and what eventually happened to her. And the whole, her mother, herself, and her daughter, who was born from this crime. Someday maybe we'll do that. So it's really quite interesting. So anyway, anybody else have another comment? Thank you, Molly, for your question. Okay, so I'm gonna continue here, and I think I'm gonna keep it somewhat short. So anyway, I like to start every time with 4 things. Number 1, we're in an extraordinary time. What's extraordinary about it? And we have to cling to this, you know. What's extraordinary about it? It's extraordinary because the Lubavitcher Rebbe told us that the Geula, the redemption of the Jewish people in the world, is unfolding. And unless you know his, if you don't know his track record, you would, you know, sounds insane, sounds absolutely insane. But the Rebbe has a phenomenal track record against reality. When reality says this kind of stuff is never happening, and the Rebbe says it's happening, it happens. And you know, all the you know, a lot of the stories he knew before Gorbachev. Gorbachev was the architect of Glasnost and releasing the Jews from Russia. And the Rebbe knew what he was going to do before he knew what he was going to do. And Gorbachev himself was astounded when he found out later when the Rebbe knew what he was going to do. And so anyway, the Rebbe says it, something you can bank on. And I cling to that. I really do, because the world is just a crazy place. It's just, I've never been in a situation like this. So, and everybody sees it this way, no matter what their political angle. You know, one side sees the other side's destroying the world, and this side says this side's destroying the world. Every single person thinks the world is being destroyed, you know? It's very, very, very interesting. So, so anyway, so we're in an extraordinary time, but our souls were handpicked. The second thing is our souls were handpicked to be here at this juncture because we have a critical role to play. And the third thing is that we have all the tools that we need. We have the mitzvahs, which are our powerful tools, the Torah, which is our guidebook. We have leaders like the Rebbe who in the last year, the last 11 months when he was speaking, gave phenomenal instruction that is very, very an outline for our time. And it's like a time capsule for our time, all the information there. And finally, what we're doing tonight is hastening the process, hastening the unfolding of the redemption. So I just want to talk very briefly, and then I'm going to tell a story. You know, there's two, I love words. I don't know, I guess that's how I ended up as a journalist, but I love words. And in Hebrew, if you love words, it pays off big time, because every word, it's not just a conglomeration of arbitrary letters. Every word means something absolutely beautiful. Names mean things. It's a phenomenal language. It's a language that God crafted himself. So so the word for difficulty in Hebrew, the word for you know, it's the main word used for it is test. But what is the word? The word is nisayan. And nisayan, the root of the word nisayan is nace. It's a nace. What is a nace? A nace is sometimes translated as a miracle, but another meaning of, actually, I don't know if that's the spelling of that nace. The spelling of this nace is nisayan. Nace, it's a banner that raises you high. So in every difficulty, there is a banner there waiting to rise up. There's a banner. If you cling to Hashem during the difficulty, and you don't bow to the forces of darkness, you don't bow to negativity, you don't succumb, you don't abandon ship, then this thing is going to raise you to heights that the good times could not possibly raise you to. Not that they're going to be forever either, the bad times, but a test raises you to a level that you could never achieve without the test. And if we look at all the difficulties in our life as a stepping stone or a ladder that connects us to Hashem, connects us closer to the big person that we could be, the incredible people that we were meant to be, then it's a magnificent thing. It is a banner. Another word that I love in Hebrew is faith. And faith in Hebrew, does anybody know the word for faith in Hebrew?
Is it Amuna?
Yes, emuna. And do you know what emuna means? You know what an uman is? Not the place in Russia, but uman is a craftsman. So it's so indicative, it's so instructive. Faith is not something that you achieve and then you go smooth sailing through life. Faith must be practiced every single day, repeatedly. Just like a musician, if a musician stops practicing, there was some famous violinist, I don't remember which one, and he said, if I stop practicing for one day, I can hear it in my music. If I stop practicing for a week, a few smart people can hear it in my music. And if I stop practicing for a month, the whole audience will get it. But it must, a skill, faith is like a fine art. Faith is a fine art, and it must be practiced daily. It must be practiced many times a day. For me, I'm practicing all day. And that's what it was meant to, that's how it was meant to be. It wasn't meant that you achieve this great height and then you're sitting pretty for the rest of your life. Hashem didn't design it like that whatsoever. So, I like this expression. I got it from Mindy Feldman. Falling is inevitable. It's inevitable. It's inevitable that you're going to fall from you feel good. You're sitting pretty with Hashem. It's inevitable that you're going to fall, and you have to know that it's part of the plan. It's part of the plan. So you get back on that ladder, and you'll climb a little higher than you were the time before. So now I'm going to tell you just a little story that I heard, and this happens to be a story from Yossi Jacobson, who we both are fond of quoting. Mm. This is after he was speaking one time. Somebody came up to him from the audience, and this person had grown up in the Monsey, New York area, and so it was a man, maybe around 30-ish. And he said, I don't usually talk about this, and I rarely tell it to anybody, but I'm going to tell something in what you said inspired me to tell you. And he said, when I was young, growing up in Monsey, I had a very special, he probably still had it, said, I'm just an extremely lively person. And my teachers couldn't deal with me. And he said, by the time I was 14, I was thrown out of 8 yeshivas. Mm. And okay, it's fine. I was thrown out of 8 yeshivas, and my father couldn't understand me whatsoever. And so my father told me he didn't know what to do with me, and he's putting me on a plane to Israel, and I have to figure it out myself because he's finished figuring it out for me. He was only 14. I don't know how, I don't know the details. I don't know if he told Yossi the details, but he was shipped off to Israel. He must have been shipped off with money, but anyway, he didn't know what to do. And he arrived in Israel, and after a while, he found himself in Bnei Brak. And one day at 12 in the morning, he wandered into one of the synagogues and to the Slonemer Shul in Bnei Brak. Bnei Brak is an intensely religious area, and at 12 o'clock, there's not really a lot of people in synagogue because the morning service is well over by that time. And so there was only one guy in there. And let me get his name. Do I have it here? Yes. His name was Rabbi Asha Arkovitz. And this guy, Rabbi Asha Arkovitz, was an old an old man at this point. He was 95 years old. He was a Slonim Chassid, a Chassid from the sect of Chassidus called Slonim. And he had been a partisan in World War II. And even when he was an unusual person, and even when he was a partisan in World War II, he was quite a remarkable person. My uncle was in the partisans. It was not an easy life whatsoever. And one of my uncles died in the woods. My other uncle, his head was in my other uncle's lap when he passed away. It was an extremely tough life in the woods. They were incredibly brave people. They would attack the Nazis. They would blow up train lines of the Nazis and then retreat into the woods, and the Nazis would pursue them. And so anyway, these partisans that he was part of, this Rabbi Asha Arkovitz, they blew up a train line of the Nazis, and they quickly retreated. But they said, they're going to find us. They know that we're retreating here. Let's go a different route around the outside and run to the other end of the forest. And they won't look there. They'll look in the forest. And unfortunately, the Nazis thought their same way. Oh, sorry. Before that, I have to tell you. Sorry, I blew this part of the story. So this Asher Arkovitz, for some reason, he couldn't run as fast as the other ones. And they said, run, you got to run faster. He said, no, that I can't. I just can't keep up with you. And they said, if you don't keep up with us, you're going to die. And he said, this is the best I can do. This is who I am. A Jew doesn't panic. Hashem is going to work with me. Whatever happens to me, happens to me. I'm happy. I'm doing what I can do. You go. And they went, and they were killed, and he made it through the war. And he was a real live Jew. And he married. His wife passed away 10 years earlier. They didn't have children. He was 95 at this point. And this is one of my favorite parts of the davening. How did he daven? He davened the morning service for 4 hours every day. And it was a living thing to him. When there would be a part in the davening that said something about how you put the sun in play every morning, he would go out and he would do it to the sun. Look what you do, Hashem. You make the sun in its orbit. And if it talked about the beautiful animals, he would go out and find, if there was a squirrel, or maybe there was a mouse in the shul, who knows? Look at your creations. And I think that's the way to daven. I really do. I want to imitate this guy. So anyway, so into the shul walks this boy of 14, and he looks. It was a part of the davening that I guess you could interrupt. And he looks up and he says, this older man looks up and he says, what is a young boy doing in a shul at 11 during a weekday, 11 in the morning? How come you're not in yeshiva? And the kid said, well, I'm an unusual case. He said, they don't like me in yeshiva. They think I'm terrible. And I was thrown so far out of 8 yeshivas. And so this older man says, he looked at the kid and he said, I want to tell you something that the Lechevitcher Rebbe, I learned from the Lechevitcher Rebbe. There's he said, there's a very famous, the most famous psalm, the most famous chapter in Tehillim is number 145 out of 150, number 145. It's called Ashrei. And if you daven, for those people who daven, who pray 3 times a day, they say it 3 times a day. And it's all about how magnificent Hashem is. A lot of the davening is about how magnificent Hashem is. And why is that? Is it that Hashem needs praise? Hashem doesn't need our praise whatsoever. There's 2 things. Number 1, Hashem wants us to know who we are dealing with. And secondly, since we are a piece of Hashem, he wants us to know that we have a piece of that magnificence. We have an incredible jewel inside us. We're not just these humdrum collection of molecules. And we can access that greatness because that's who we are. So anyway, he said that I can't even pronounce it. The Lechavitcher Maggid said that in Ashrei, there's the 12th line of Ashrei says, Lahodia lebnei ha'adam gevurasav uchvod hadar malchuso. How is it translated right here? To make known to men his mighty acts. That's Lahodia lebnei adam gevurasav. To make known, he wants to make known to Hashem to make known to man his mighty acts. So the traditional way of understanding that is that Hashem wants to make known to people Hashem's mighty acts. But there's two ways to read it, as the Lechavitcher Maggid pointed out. Lahodia levnei ha'adam gevurasav, to tell to each person his greatness. Not Hashem's greatness, his greatness. Every person has to know his greatness that he has stored in him. And he said to this kid, just make sure that no one ever takes or tries to rob you of your power and your kingship. Know that it's there and don't let anybody take it away from you. And with that, he returned to his davening. So this kid actually found a yeshiva that would accept him. But 6 months later, I'm just going to turn off this noise. 6 months later, 6 months later, that yeshiva couldn't take him either. He was just too wild. He was just by nature a wild kid, and they threw him out. And he actually found that was yeshiva number 9, and then he actually found a 10th one that would accept him. And another 6 months later, that yeshiva threw him out. And it was too much for him. He's 15 years old. He's now been thrown out of 10 yeshivas. Never heard of anything. He never heard of any kid that ever went through such a thing. And he felt that he was like damaged goods, and he felt he had nobody to talk about it with. His father he couldn't talk about it with, and he felt for various reasons he couldn't talk to his mother either. And he figured, I'm just not, whoever heard of such a thing, And so he found a very tall building. I think it was in Mea Sharim. I don't know how they have tall buildings there, but I thought that that's what it said. And anyway, he found a very, very tall building in Yerushalayim. And 11 a.m. in a bright sunny morning, he climbed all the way through all the stairs up to the top floor. He opened the latch to the roof. In Israel, all roofs are flat-topped roofs. He went out onto the roof. He went to the perimeter of the roof. He looked over. He examined what he was going to do. He tried to come up with a strategy so that he would be successful in ending his life, successful in doing it in a good, definitive way. And as he was making up his strategy, all of a sudden, the voice of this Slonim Chassid came to him. Don't let anybody ever take your majesty away from you. Don't let anybody ever rob you of the strength that is, that you have, that is inherent in you. And he started thinking, I think that guy meant it. This thing that I'm about to do right now, it's always an option. Before I do this, I'm going to go discover my strength. And he went, and that's exactly what he did. And he told Rabbi Jacobson, today, I'm married to a magnificent woman. I have 3 children, and I have a phenomenally successful business. And better than all those things, I'm a happy person. And so anyway, obviously the point of the story is that we should all know, never let anything rob us of our understanding of who we are, our greatness, the greatness that we have implanted in us, that is there. And but when I heard the story, I also thought of something else. We all have let's take a sip of water. We all have difficult relationships. Or maybe I'm unique, but I think we all have some difficult relationships. And if you have a difficult relationship with somebody who is like a peer, somebody that, you know, let's say, you know, somebody who has their merits, you know, you know, another Jew, another, you know, person who has their difficulties, but they have their merits. So, one of the most effective things that I know of is to immerse your mind before you have to deal with them, or even if you don't have to deal with them, immerse your mind in that person's strengths. Just, you know, recount it to yourself, remind yourself of their strengths. And the next time you deal with them, they are going to sense that preparation, and they are going to be a different person. They're going to sense that she sees me a little bit at least. And some of the difficulty, God willing, will wash away. So anyway, I have another story, but it's already 8:00. Another personal story about something I went through this weekend. And so, but I'm not going to tell you because maybe I'll do it next time. And it taught me something else, another tool for sanity. In the meantime, I'm good. It's late, and we all have what to do. So I'm going to wish everybody a wonderful. Thank you so much for
That's a
joining.
cliffhanger.
The
You
second
have to tell us next week.
Okay, good. God willing. Okay, good.
God willing, I hope.
Thank you. Okay, be well, everybody.
Thank you so much. You too. Be well. Thank you. Wonderful story.